Amos chapters 6 and 7. Welcome, everybody. Jareen, how are you? You're good? Okay. A little bit of background. I'm going to do some chronology and some map stuff tonight because of what's going on. But for 40 years, from 790 something to 750 something, the northern kingdom under Jeroboam II and the southern kingdom under King Uzziah, both kingdoms for 40 years have had one king. They're stable and they're strong. So that's the context of this chapter. Everybody thinks things are going well, but guess what? They're not going so well. And that's where we're headed with this chapter. So, Amos chapter 6, verse 1. And, we're going to come to something is it chapter 7 where I left off the verses, I'm sorry, but in the slides. But when we get there, I'll just read them. So, chapter 6, verse 1. You who are complacent in Zion, and you who feel secure on Mount Samaria, you notable men of a foremost nation, to whom the people of Israel come, woe to you. By the way, if he's talking about Zion and Samaria, which kingdom are we talking about? Both. Zion is Jerusalem. Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom. So it's both. Yeah, and we'll prove that in the next verse. Go to Calne and look for it. I'll have a map here in a second. Go from there to Great Hamath or Lebo Hamath, and then go down to Gath and Philistia. Are they better off than your two kingdoms? So there's your both answer, Brett. Is their land larger than yours? Here's what had happened. So is that pretty clear for you? I've got a weird glare, so I can't really see it, but I see it in front of me. So up north we have Calne, and then Hamath. Then you see the word Syria on the actual map. And then you get down, there's Lebanon, Damascus, eventually down to where it says Jordan, and then Jerusalem. So that's Jerusalem. I actually have the lower part of the Dead Sea blocked off by the word Gath. This is such a big scale map. So it's just a satellite picture. What a century we live in when I can say it's just a satellite picture. Like, my childhood pastor wouldn't have been able to say that, but I just rattle it off. So Calne, way up by Aleppo, was say a Jerusalem or Samaria-sized city that King Jeroboam had destroyed. He had attacked Hamath as well, and Uzziah had attacked the southern one. So you have these attacks going on. So I really went all out with animation here. So Hamath, Calne, and Gath have fallen, and the idea of the passage is you guys feel complacent, but you destroyed those cities, and they're the same size as you. And by the way, you dummies, what has Jeroboam done? Calne and Hamath were the buffer states between Israel and Assyria. And Gath is one of the buffer states or cities between Judah and Egypt. What have you done? And why are you feeling so secure? If they're gone, why do you think that you're going to be any better than them? So, okay, you really got to appreciate this picture of this lady on a dining couch. You recognize the dining couch, kind of the Cleopatra-esque dining couch. But do you know what I think of as soon as I see this picture of the couch itself? The Last Supper. This is what they would have been laying on for the Last Supper. It's correctly positioned. The back and the head are such that to lay on it and eat, you have to lay on your left arm. Because they assumed that you know what the Latin word for left is? Sinister. So the right arm is Dexter. So they laid on the left arm because that's how digestion works if you're a Roman, I guess. And then they assume you're going to eat with your right arm, your good arm. So they were, cruel to left-handies, but we're used to a world of cruelty. I don't know if I can answer you, Mark, but go ahead.
I thought most Israelites were left-handed.
No, Benjamites, Benjamin people of Benjamin. Yeah, the left-handed slingers and stuff like that. But Israelites, and we're talking about Rome anyway, kind of. And so, yeah, the typical chair was a right-handed chair. But you see there, she's eating grapes. She's being served fish by some cartoon hands. And see what's in front of her? Turkey, of course, is unique to what continent? North America. But somebody said that this morning, and I said, no, it's an ostrich. So I have no idea. I don't know. But like a turkey, I wouldn't eat the neck of either one. I don't eat the neck of the turkey. I know everybody said, no, that's the best part. I know that goes to the neighbor's dog. So I do the same thing if it were an ostrich. But I think it actually could be a goose in the picture or something like that. So you put off the evil day and bring near a reign of terror. You lie on beds inlaid with ivory and lounge on your couches. The word here is really dining couch in Hebrew. And you dine on choice lambs and fattened calves. There were 3 sources of ivory in ancient times, and they were all available to Israel. I'm going to make you guess what they were. Jeraine, do you want the easy one? Where can you get ivory? Elephants, yes. And there were elephants not just down in Africa, but they had a kind of an elephant that is extinct today, called an Assyrian elephant. And it was fairly common, and they could get tusks from the Syrian elephants. What's the next one? Walruses in the Red Sea. Yes, they could get walrus ivory, and it's almost as common as elephant ivory in ancient times, if you can figure out the difference between the two. The third one is pretty obscure. Narwhal? It is, narwhal. Yeah, a rhino doesn't have any ivory. That horn is hair. But a narwhal is a tooth, actually, that grows. If I'm right, it grows from it's the bottom canine on one side that goes through its lip. So it looks like it's coming out of its nose, but it's really growing through it, or something like that. But anyway, they could get those in the Red Sea also. They're still there today. You can still see narwhals and walruses and stuff in the Red Sea. And so there were different places. But what they would do then is take the sources of ivory, and quite often make the easiest, and I think probably the cheapest way to do it was actually to carve it into coins. If you understand what I mean by that, the tusk, just cut it into coins, and then polish and then carve into the coin and affix that to something with little, would we call them rosettes? Or something like that in architecture. I don't know exactly what the word would be, but something along those lines. When I was doing industrial drafting class in middle school and high school, we never got to rosettes. We kind of got to joists and stuff like that, but not beyond. Forgive my blue collar background. And Deutschlander writes in the Theology of the Cross about the theology of the couch. And he especially talked about this when I had him in class in college. The theology of the couch, which is about the ivory and the lounge on your dining couches, is he talks especially about people who avoid worship for various reasons. Now, there are a couple pretty good reasons for avoiding worship. And one is distance. Ron, we were talking before class about the Wisconsin Synod Church in London, but can people in Edinburgh or, get down to London? That's a little bit like people in Chicago getting over to New Ulm, that maybe once a year or something like that. And then there are folks who are maybe too, shall I say, sick or infirm to be able to get to worship. And what do we call those folks? Shut-ins. Yeah, we go see them. In St. Paul's, Pastor Scharf just presented our latest report on shut-ins. We currently have, of our membership, 82 shut-ins, and about 25 other people that we see who are not part of our membership. So about 110 right now, homebound or shut-in people that we see in various nursing homes and in their homes. And how many pastors do we have? 3. Mr. Kushel shares a set of shut-ins with one individual, Ron Schmidt. And between them, they see 5 a month. So the other 105 are for the 3 of us. And but the ones in town, we see regularly, pretty faithfully. A couple people in their homes, we don't always get to see, because sometimes they just don't answer their door or their phone. But we see them, but they're in nursing homes and stuff like that. And then there's a group a little bit further out that goes from Klossner to Searles to Mankato to what's just beyond Sleepy Eye, the next one over at Springfield. St. John Springfield is a nursing home. And also beyond Searles is the Medelia, the nursing home in Medelia. That's also St. John's in Medelia. So we see them pretty regularly, all of those folks. We get to most of them monthly. And I have a student in Wyndham, which is an hour, and we have a shut-in in Revere and so forth. But if we get out to Revere, which is 2 hours away or so, and we have somebody over in, Sioux Falls. And then we get to, there's a city down in Iowa and quite a bit in the Twin Cities and so forth, and over as far as Owatonna. These are our members. How often do we get to see them? It's more like quarterly, every 3 or 4 months. We're able to go see them. That's a pretty big commitment to go and see, those folks. But we try to do that. Pastor Sutton used to do that regularly on his travels, and now Pastor Scharf is our district vice president, so he has to travel to the Twin Cities regularly. So he does those shut-ins like Don used to. So, but there are people who are also not coming to worship, for other reasons. And in his lectures on the theology of the couch, Deutschlander brings out these 4 reasons. I'll see if you agree with them. You can think of a 5th one maybe. So for a specifically sinful reason, like I don't like so-and-so's preaching, something like that, and we hear that, okay? Number 2 is on account of a specific sin. Oh, well, I rob banks for a living, and pastor keeps saying that bank robbing is sinful. So I'm going to stay away from church. Insert other sin here, but you see what I'm getting at. Thirdly and this is the one that's, I think, more common, is people who are, I'll say, ignorant of what worship really is and why we do it. And so they just stay away because they don't see the point. We have quite a few young people. They get into the post-high school years, and that's where we lose people for that reason. And then, fourthly, people who are actually expressing lovelessness for those who do worship. Like, I think so-and-so is a hypocrite for worshiping there. Or, as we sometimes have this, like somebody will say, well, I just got divorced, and I'm afraid that my wife's going to show up. Like, we have that, and so they stay away. And then my response is often, neither one of you is showing up. And, so can anybody think of a fifth one in here? So the reason for staying away from worship for a specifically sinful reason, or because of a sinful act in their life that they're, going through, or ignorance of what worship is, or a lovelessness for those who are in worship. Those are Ron, you got another one?
Well, since 2020, people are afraid of getting or telling someone else to get sick.
Actually, the COVID thing, I would throw that into the first category, along with homebound and stuff like that. There's a crossover that our district presidium, the pastors who help us with worship in the district, they're wrestling with, is that part of the first group, or is that now getting into the second group? Where are we? And the answer is obviously we have to be patient with them. And Pastor Eilhoffen is very energetic about we have to educate our people who aren't coming. And but the actual doing of that is the difficult part. But we're getting there. And Ron, I appreciate that on the Board of Elders, you're part of this, and the challenges. So, but of course, the benefits of worship. Can we run through some of those? What are there benefits of worship? Thank you. Everybody's kind of nodded. That's good. Beginning. What are some? Mark, you got one?
Strengthening faith.
Strengthening faith, absolutely. And you got two they're different ones, but yeah. Fellowship in particular, to have friendly, regular contact with other believers, people who believe and confess the same thing that you do. If you've ever worshiped in a church where they obviously believe something that we don't, there's a churning in the gut that comes along with that. It's difficult. If you sometimes you go to a wedding or a funeral or something like that, and you end up with that. Anybody else? That's two.
Sacrament.
The sacrament, being assured regularly of the forgiveness of sins, and because God knows what we're like inside. Because I don't know if all of you need it, but certainly our Lord knows that I'm dumb enough to forget. And I need the reassurance of the forgiveness of sins. And that if I hear it, it might not sink in. But if I eat it and drink it, then I'm bound to get it a little bit better. Did I get forgiveness today? Oh yeah, I still got the wine on my breath. By the way, can I just share this with you? Pastor Scharf should win an award for last Sunday. Because in a weekend where we had 2 baptisms and 2 retirements and Lord's Supper and a lot of guests and all kinds of stuff going on, and a program that Nate and Hannah were putting together for the retirement, in the middle of all of that, between 8 o'clock and 9:30, a visitor walked up to Pastor Scharf and said, "Oh, by the way, I have to have white wine." Do you know what he did? His car was parked in. He ran home on his 2 little feet during the sermon, during my 9:30 sermon. He ran home. He lives down on, Franklin? Yeah. And he ran home. And God bless him. I only have Dr. Pepper in my house and Hawaiian Punch. Nate had white wine. And I would have had to mix vinegar and Sprite to come up with something like white wine. I don't know. He brought a bottle of white wine, and in the sacristy, using his communion kit, walked out as if nothing was wrong with the world, with a couple of individual cups of white wine, and just set them casually on the tray. Nobody saw him do it, and there it was. So I could turn the tray around, and the woman could grab. Go ahead.
In all fairness to the women, some people are allergic to red wine.
Yeah, I went through that with Dr. Belke this morning.
Tannins and histamines
Yeah.
I can't drink Merlot because I get a severe headache.
Yeah.
My sister can't drink it either.
Yeah. But if you were gonna have the sacrament, would you have called ahead?
I don't know. I wouldn't worry about it. I figured God's busy.
Yeah. I mean, I would have thought a phone call like on Saturday would have done something there, but she just, and Nate just handled it. Like, I really think we should find a little high school track trophy and put a stole flying behind him, he's running down the street or whatever. Because, wow. I don't think he was wearing this gown, but he ran home. God bless him. So, my list, we hear the word. Mark said that. We hear the word of God. We receive the sacrament and the forgiveness of sins. We pray together and hear each other's griefs and joys. We had a bunch of calls, in the congregation this weekend and stuff like that. We hear the word in the sermon explained and applied. And sometimes, whether we're children or adults, we need the explanation. What's the old joke? How many angels' names do we hear of in the Bible? Gabriel, Michael, and Harold. Hark the herald angels sing. And we need a little bit of explanation of those things. This weekend, I attempted to explain to our littlest children, the 2-year-olds, what body and soul are, and so how did I do, Jareen?
It's hard.
I think that none of them had heard the word soul before, and because only in one service did I have anybody over the age of 3. It was all, and last night too, I had a God bless Megan for bringing up her infant, but I had a couple of 2-year-olds, and an infant, but they put their hands together, they pointed to heaven, so we begin, but we try. And we sing, and there are other arts, like the banners and like the stained glass windows, and you sing and it stays with you. Yesterday, my neighbor Dale Margraf, our former principal, is dying. And the faculty went yesterday and sang to him. And Becky said it was the first time in 2 days that his eyes opened. And he was crying. And therefore everybody else cried. And it was a big blubber fest. But I've had that happen before, where the man who was custodian when I first came to St. Paul's, his name was Rich Shopicum. A few years ago, he died of probably lung cancer or something like that. And I went to see them in their apartment in one of the garden terrace things or whatever it was. And a big tank of oxygen and everything there. And I went and I had the idea, which I've used ever since, of taking along a Bible, yes, but my hymnal, and I sang through the church year. 1 or 2 verses of 1 or 2 hymns from every season of the year. So we got to do a Christmas song and some Lenten stuff and some Easter and some different things. And as I'm singing there, and Marion, his wife, was singing along. And Rich had been quiet, and then after a while he starts kind of doing this with his hands. And I said, Marion, what's he doing? And she said, he's directing you. Like, he was, he's listening along, and he couldn't sing, but he could listen, and he knew, and he was appreciated. Go ahead.
Be kind of on the same.
Yeah,
But the 11 o'clock service, I don't know if anybody else here was at 11 o'clock.
I was.
Okay. When the kids sang, I was upset.
Oh.
At the end of that song, I was bawling, and I have this happen
Yeah.
with the kids, because you listen to the words, and it's just passing that on to our children. That's what's important. But there was one little girl.
That little girl.
Oh my gosh, I could pick her up.
Yeah.
She was just above everybody else, and that's what really got to me. Just gave me goosebumps of, having faith like a little child, and just.
Yeah.
And I thought, I bet I probably was like that. I love to sing, and I probably was just like that.
I was listening from behind, of course, and I could hear all the 7th and 8th graders singing in tune. And she's belting out the words like she is the chanter, and and it was the pure definition of make a joyful noise. And it was, but she had the words so clear. Thank you for saying that. That was wonderful. And it was all the St. Paul's and St. John's kids together. They filled the whole steps, everything. It was amazing. Oh, and singing and using like the windows and everything, it reinforces the truths in our hearts. So the advantages of worship, and there are more. But let's go on to verse 5 of our 2 chapters. You strum away like on your harps like David and improvise on musical instruments. So I get the idea that in Samaria there was a pretty happening music scene. That they were doing things that were pretty fancy schmancy. What do we remember in all of Scripture? What should be what we remember about David the most? I would think his faith. Maybe that he's an ancestor of Jesus, but his faith. But they were thinking, oh no, it was how good of a guitar player he was. Who was a really talented lutist was Martin Luther, almost a virtuoso. We never talk about that, do we? When we remember Luther, it's what we're grateful for, that he restored the gospel to the church. But they were proud of that they could play like David. You drink wine by the bowlful. How much is a bowl full of wine? A quart? More than that? I don't know. I was with a family member once at his 80th birthday when they brought him a half quart of brandy old fashioned in a huge glass. Do you know what brandy old fashioned is? It's a Wisconsin old fashioned. It's a special drink. He tipped that thing back before he had eaten anything. They brought it before the food came. And then when the food came, they're like, oh, you finished do you want another one? Sure. My brother and I are just like, what? And then he drove home. Oh, I'm fine. By the grace of God, I lived through that. I'm not the one who had the quart of brandy old fashioned, but you use the finest lotions. Most of the Israelites used one thing medicinally, which was olive oil. But some of them got to use actual, out of the plant, aloe. And then some people had mixtures of aloe with fragrance and stuff. And that's what he's talking about with lotions here, is when they would have like ground, whatever, flower petals or however you make scent, and get it into aloe as a lotion, like in a container. And Deb, go ahead. Please share what you're laughing about, because I don't.
You said with crushed flowers. When I was a little girl, I'd crush up crabapple flowers or dandelions, thinking it was going to smell good, and it did not.
Did not smell good. So
Just trying to make perfume.
I get it. Rose petals might have been a wiser but more expensive choice. Yeah, you can get away.
The tree sure smelled good. I got that.
And in my backyard, the lilacs are out right now for a little while yet. But you do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph. Therefore, and Joseph would be the northern kingdom. Therefore, you'll be among the first to go into exile. Your feasting and lounging will end. So, verse 8. The sovereign Lord has sworn by himself, a sign that the verdict is final, cannot be revoked. Sworn by myself, says the Lord. The Lord Almighty declares, I abhor the pride of Jacob and detest his fortresses. I will deliver up the city and everything in it. So the city of Jacob is Samaria. The northern kingdom is collapsing. I've got a little chronology coming up. We'll take a look at that. If 10 men are left in one house, and Obviously, that's 10 guys who are in there because they're scared of the attackers. They crowd inside of a house. They too will die. Even the ones who are hiding are going to get caught and they're going to die. And if a relative who is to burn the bodies, when did they do cremation in the Old Testament? Well, 3 possibilities. Cremation was basically unheard of. They didn't do that. But they did it if somebody was infected with an especially terrible disease. When King Uzziah died, he had leprosy. They burned him and buried him elsewhere, specifically because of that. Did you know that that's true also of old Doc Vogel? That's Ann Vogel's father. He had been to Africa, and he caught something. And when he died, he knew that he was carrying some kind of an infectious disease. He was one of the first ones in town, requested to be cremated to destroy whatever that bug was. Remarkable. Just learned a lot about that guy in the last couple of days. For different reasons, but just interesting. So cremation because of disease. Also because of a particularly heinous crime. They might, after they stone someone to death, they might burn him also. But they also did it, and this is what this is a reference to, is if the city is under siege and we can't get out to the cemetery, what do we do with the bodies? So they had to burn them. Yeah. So, if somebody comes to burn the bodies, comes to carry them out of the house, and asks anybody still hiding there, is anybody with you? Well, what might he do as he's carrying out a dead body? He might want to stop and say a little prayer or blessing or something. And so his response, and even if they say no, nobody's with you, then he'll say, hush, we must not mention the name of the Lord. Before they even get to like a God bless you or have a nice day or shalom or anything, hush. Don't mention the name of the Lord. They're scared, I think, either superstitial, he's scared that the Lord's wrath is on us, and if you say his name, he'll find you. Like he doesn't already know where you are. But it's also possible, and I think it's likely, that in the days of bad King Jeroboam II, they might have been afraid that the king has ears and is listening for somebody who's not loyal to the king because he might be talking about the true God. So when a dictator gets to the point where he's only surrounding himself with people who are incompetent but loyal, and he begins to despise people who speak out in any way, you've got a bad situation, and it's a government that's about to fall. This is, and the word hush here, also I want to mention this. Hush is identical in English and in Hebrew. Hush. In Greek, it's siga, not, And in Latin, it would be like take. But in Hebrew, hush. In English, hush. Or just shh. That kind of thing. Isn't that a curiosity? Languages, I love language. It's fascinating to me. Also, for Eichmann, I had to look up that word hush and do all kinds of research about it. That's why I know about it. But, yeah. For the Lord has given the command, and he will smash the great house into pieces, that's rich people, and the small house into bits, that's poor people, right? Big house, little house, rich people, poor people. Although my classmate thought it was house and outhouse. But Professor Eichmann said that's wrong. So now verse 12 is a tricky one. I'm just going to tell you what I think it says in Hebrew as opposed to here in the NIV. So here it says, do horses run on the rocky crags? Like if you have a stony hillside with lots of rocks and stones, would a horse run there? The answer is no. This is a rhetorical question. The answer is naturally no. But the next phrase, does one plow there with oxen? I think should be, does one plow the sea with oxen. Now, either one works in the rhetorical sense, right? They both would be no. But you might, in a desperate situation, plow a rocky hillside. But you would never plow the sea with a plow and an ox. In fact, the point of these two is that common sense says, of course not. And then the Lord responds with, but you have not followed common sense. You've turned justice into poison and the fruit of righteousness into bitterness. You who rejoice in the conquest of these two places, Lodabar and Karnaim. These were places way up north that Jeroboam's father, Jehoash, had conquered, but then the Assyrians have now retaken them. So he's saying, you're rejoicing over these places that you no longer possess. Should you be rejoicing over that? You've already lost them. And common sense says, stop having victory parades when you don't even own the real estate anymore. Does that make sense? That's what's going on here. For the Lord Almighty declares, I will stir up a nation against you, O house of Israel, that will oppress you all the way from Lebo Hamath to the valley of the Arabah. And this is where those two places are. Hamath way up north and the Arabah south of the Dead Sea. Now,
How many miles in between those two places?
oh, that's from Searles to International Falls. Okay? But all of Israel fits exactly inside of Minnesota. Yeah. I'm really happy that one of my professors, Ernst Wendland, made us overlay Israel onto a state map, a highway map of our own state. Because all of us who are from Wisconsin or Minnesota, and I was from Minnesota at that time already, and it fits exactly into Minnesota. The poor guy who was from Iowa had to he had to include a bunch of Minnesota with his, but all right. I have to read the beginning of chapter 7 out of my NIV because I don't have it on the slides. I deleted, and I think it's because I had animation. I was fiddling around with slides and I just made it go away this morning. And Ron will attest, I had a staff meeting all afternoon, and then Oak Hills, I didn't get back here until just now to do the class. I haven't had time. So sorry. But this is verses 1 and 2. This is what the sovereign Lord showed to me. He was preparing swarms of locusts after the king's share had been harvested, and just as the second crop was coming up. So these could be locusts like we had back in Joel, or it could be an army. But the first crop evidently was cut, the early crop. That was the king's share. And then when the second crop is coming up, probably a bigger crop, but a second crop, bugs came and ate it, or it got destroyed by some, either an army or by bugs. And he goes on to say, so I cried out, Sovereign Lord, forgive. How can Jacob survive? He's so small. And then we go back to our text here. So the Lord relented. This will not happen, the Lord said. So this disaster he had foreseen. And then Amos protests, and the Lord says, okay, that's not going to happen. So this thing about the bugs or whatever, it didn't actually happen. But the Lord was preparing this. And I'm just going to ask your indulgence. Forgive my animation here. It's weird. Okay. It'll never happen again. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. The sovereign Lord was calling for judgment by fire. It dried up the great deep and devoured the land. So like the gulches didn't have any water or anything like that. So I cried out, Sovereign Lord, I beg you, stop. How can Jacob survive? He's so small. So the Lord relented. This will not happen either, the sovereign Lord said. So two judgments were pronounced by God, but Amos protests, and God said, okay, not gonna do it. Welcome, Dave. We're just at the beginning of chapter 7 on the back of the sheep, okay. How was your day so far?
Oh, I was busy, but, it went okay.
Okay, okay.
The first half of the day, I got paid more than I was worth.
Always delighted to have you here. This is what he showed me. Now the Lord gives a vision. The Lord was standing by a wall that had been built true to plumb, with a plumb line in his hand. Now, Ron, you're a building inspector. Sometimes, can you tell us precisely what a plumb line is? Or do you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
A plumb is a mass that hangs heavy down.
Like a weight, a metal weight
Yeah,
probably,
pointed.
yeah.
And then the string.
Thank you for that, yeah.
The string is suspension point, so you can tell what's a true vertical.
Yeah, true vertical to the earth itself. Yeah, because gravity is what pulls. And you mentioned it has a point, because it'll probably, as you're holding it, it'll probably sway or spin or whatever, or rock for a while. But because of that point, it will settle down to exactly vertical. And that's a perfectly true line to, so you know what vertical is, and you can do right angles. And that's how you can get a floor where the marbles don't roll, stuff like that in ancient, or whatever they had for marbles in ancient times and things like that. I lost my marbles a long time ago. Yeah. So the Lord is standing there with a plumb line, and the Lord asked me, "What do you see, Amos?" "A plumb line," I replied. The Lord talks to Jeremiah like this too. "What do you see, Jeremiah?" "I see a cauldron pointing out of the north," and stuff like that. Well, the Lord said, "Look, I am setting a plumb line among my people Israel. I will spare them no longer." What is the plumb line God holds up against us? The law. It's the 10 Commandments. Yeah, I'm gonna hold this up against you. Now, the high places of Isaac will be destroyed, and the sanctuaries of Israel will be ruined. With my sword I will rise against the house of Jeroboam. So you know that Jeroboam is the king of the north, or maybe you didn't, but Jeroboam is the king of the north at this time, Jeroboam II. You know who Israel is. Why bring Isaac's name into this all of a sudden? Well, in the north, first of all, was Isaac around in the days of the tabernacle? No. In fact, Isaac is 500 years before the tabernacle, 400 or 500 years before the tabernacle. When were all of our grandparents born? My grandfather, 1899, my grandmother, 1902, and then her grandmother, 1910, like in there somewhere. If you take those dates BC, that's Isaac. Okay? Like 1900 BC is Isaac. Abraham is your birthday. Faith, did you know this? What year were you born? 1999. Should we all say it? Wow, are you ever young? Anyway, so 1999. You're I think that means Deb is the second youngest in the room, but that's. But that's an Abraham date, BC. Does that make sense? You put 1999 BC, and Abraham, the patriarch, was alive at that time. So that helps you with your timeline. Then, do you know a date for either Martin Luther or Christopher Columbus?
1492.
Yeah, excellent. That BC is a Moses date. So that's the gap in between Abraham and Moses. About 500 years, And then that's the gap between us and Martin Luther. Now, Isaac, therefore, about 100, Abraham was 99 when Isaac was born. So you go, 99 years down the road there. for Isaac. And Isaac is still, so he's still 300 years or so before the tabernacle was ever built. But the people up north were worshiping at the little spots where Isaac would stop and set up a little altar and worship the Lord. Bethel was one of those. That's one of Isaac's, and Jacob's too. But there were these other places where Isaac, basically Isaac's lifetime was going around the land promised to Abraham, and the jealous Philistines and others kept filling in and hiding Abraham's wells for all of his flocks and stuff. And there's just one verse that tells us this in Genesis, but Isaac spent most of his lifetime redigging his father's wells. Can you imagine that kind of a life? But that's kind of how Isaac spent his time. Doing the flock thing and then raising his kids and redigging dad's wells. Well, wherever he would do that, he would set up a shrine and thing. And they were still worshiping at those high places of Isaac. With Isaac, that was legitimate worship to the Lord. With the northern kingdom, that was not legitimate worship to the Lord. But they're dragging Isaac's name into it to make it sound as if it's okay. So that's what's going on here. So, proclaiming this, and against the house of Jeroboam, this is what Amos has been doing. And Amos has been doing it, preaching these sermons, at Bethel, which is one of these shrines up north. We find out now, or we're about to, that Amos was up north accusing the northern kingdom of having false worship. So we get to these last 7 or 8 verses. Then Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent a message to Jeroboam, king of Israel. He told on Amos. I'm going to tell. And he did. So he's heard Amos, so he's the priest of Bethel. Not a priest of the Lord, but a priest of, Jeroboam the first had created this calf worship up north and down here at Bethel, and they were still doing it 200 years later. So Amos is raising a conspiracy against you in the very heart of Israel. The land cannot bear all his words. What do you do with a guy if the land cannot bear his words?
Put them on a ship.
Or throw him off a cliff or whatever you're going to do. Yeah, something like that. For this is what Amos is saying. And I'm not sure if Amos actually said this or if it's just the opponent twisting his words. But it's not that far off. Amos could have said this, but it could just be a twisting of the words. Jeroboam will die by the sword, and Israel will surely go into exile away from their native land. Well, this is the order of how things happened, and it's about 30 years in between, but that is kind of how it happened. Then Amaziah said to Amos, "Get out, you seer." Seer was the old word for prophet. Is it Roia as opposed to Navi? So to us it doesn't matter too much, but one is a seer, a guy who sees visions. Go back to the land of Judah, earn your bread there and do your prophesying there. He's accusing Amos of just being out for cash. Earn your bread there, which is actually more like what Amaziah was probably guilty of. He's accusing Amos of it. Don't prophesy anymore at Bethel, because this is, and does he say the Lord's sanctuary or the temple of the Lord? No, he says the king's sanctuary, the temple of the kingdom. Jeroboam demanded loyalty over logic or sanity or anything else. So they were his shrines. It was his worship, not God's worship or God's shrines. Now, I've got a little chronology. I'll try to do this quickly for you. But in the year 793 or 792, Jeroboam the second, no relation to Jeroboam the first, 200 years later, so a different guy, becomes king in Israel. He's from the second dynasty. There are two dynasties in the northern kingdom. The dynasty of Omri and of Jehu, and this is the second one. So, and then in Judah, King Uzziah is on the throne at the same time. They both have a 40-year reign. In 753, Zechariah, the son of Jeroboam II, is king for about 10 minutes, and then he's murdered by this guy Shallum in 752. Shallum is then murdered by a guy named Menachem. Menachem is the son of the Zechariah. Okay? Just let that sit there for a second. And at the same time that Menachem, or Menahem, however you want to say it, he now has a rival named Pekah. Not a Pokemon, but Pekah. And I believe that Pekah was you know how Israel had tribes in the middle and then tribes across the river over like in Moab? There were the Reuben and what else? Gad and half of Ephraim or half of Manasseh was over there. I think he's the prince of those tribes. Like he was the governor or whatever of that. So he sets up his own kingdom. And the thing in the book of Kings where we talk about these guys, and Isaiah, Pekah, although he's the rival king through two other kings, he's the one that people deal with. He's the guy who's really in power in the north. But there seem to be two Israels for a while. And Pekah actually took over Samaria. So that the next guy had to be, I think, back up in Tirzah where they used to be king. But he's an interesting guy, this Pekah, who reigns for about 20 years. Meanwhile, a couple years later, Uzziah contracts leprosy when he decided to go into the holy place and offer his own incense. And while he's doing it, leprosy actually erupts on his forehead. And the priests just get him out. Like, you've got leprosy, you can't be in here. And so he's taken out to a house outside the city to be separate. And his son Jotham becomes like co-king or crown prince or whatever. So he's close enough that Jotham can go ask dad questions, but he's, in here. Meanwhile, yes, no relation to Pekah. Pekahiah becomes king because Menachem has died. And he's followed 2 years later by Hoshea, who is the last king of the north. Is this clear as mud? Simple names, right? Bob, Dave, Glenn. Okay. Abraham Lincoln. Okay. And Uzziah dies then and is followed by his son Ahaz, who is one of the worst of all of the kings of the north, or the south, I mean. Terrible, terrible. Ahaz in the south and Ahab in the north are two of the worst baddies, and they have similar names and everything. And then in 723 or so, the fall of Samaria, finally. So that's kind of our chronology of how things. But Jeroboam, this is who Amos is preaching to. Within 30 years, there's nothing left, or 40 years, nothing left of the north anymore. It just crumbles into nothing. It's less and less and less and less. Go ahead, Mark.
Do any of these words have any root in Hebrew words?
Sure. In fact, Zechariah, Shallum, Menachem, Hoshea are all Hebrew names you can find elsewhere. Yeah. And Pekahiah, that Iyah at the end is the name of the Lord. Yahweh. So, yeah. Uzziah is a curious one in the south. It was a nickname they called him, if you think of it this week or next weekend, I have Uzziah's name. They moved his remains after he was buried elsewhere, and the second headstone of Uzziah has been discovered. It's in perfect shape. And there's a little poem on it that said, here are the remains of Uzziah, moved at this time, do not open, or something like that, because he had died of leprosy. And I have a picture of this and the translation of it in the email devotion booklet from last week. It's currently up on the desk, and you can see this square thing with this thing. And anybody who reads Hebrew can see it very clearly, the U-Z-Z Yod H, it's Uzziah. It's very clearly Uzziah with a doubled Zion. It's not just, sometimes you can double a Hebrew letter by putting a dot in it. It means it's twice, but there are just two Zions. It's like a double L in English or something. It's kind of a cool thing. And this happened during the time of the Maccabees. So just before the time of Christ is when this got moved. So just a curiosity that they knew who he was, but the thing was, they needed the space out in the Kidron Valley, so they had to move some guys. And so they moved it up to the woods in the olive grove on the Mount of Olives. And it just so happened that this, later on, a Russian Orthodox convent was up there, and they're the ones who discovered it. Like it was under a tree or something in their woods, and they found this thing. So it might still be up there. I think that convent is still there. But anyway, we've gone beyond our time, and I have 3 verses left. Can we just run through them quickly? So Amos answered Amaziah, I was neither a prophet nor a prophet's son. I was a shepherd, and I also took care of sycamore fig trees. Do you remember us going through this in the introduction to Amos? He had done this. He was a shepherd and so forth. But the Lord took me from tending flock and said to me, go prophesy to my people Israel. Now then hear the word of the Lord. You say, do not prophesy against Israel. Stop preaching against the house of Isaac. Therefore, this is what the Lord says. And he says it directly to this Amaziah, this opposing prophet. Your wife will become a prostitute in this city, and your sons and daughters will fall by the sword. Your land, that Azariah owned, whatever field he had or whatever, your land will be measured and divided up, and you yourself will die in a pagan country, and Israel will certainly go into exile away from their native land. Yikes. That actually meant that this guy was going to live a long time. But why would a woman go and voluntarily become a prostitute? Her husband's gone, her sons are dead, she has no means of income. She needs something to live. And so this terrible, what would we call this? It's a prophecy, but it's also judgment, yeah, or even a curse. Yeah. But what happened? And that's how the chapter ends. I promise next week we will get to the one thing that's been missing from Amos all along. The gospel. Next week in chapter 9. And from there. Also in July 22nd or so, it's whatever the Tuesday is, in the third, I think it's the third Tuesday in July. Are you looking that up, Faith, or not?
Yeah.
July 22nd? I think that's right. 22nd or 23rd? Or is it?
Yes, Tuesday.
Tuesday? This class will have a guest Bible study leader. His name is Pastor, is it Musa? From the Obadiah Synod in Africa. And he's going to be here for our Synod Convention. And he asked if he could address a small Bible class. And so naturally, Pastor Scharf gave him mine. I'm just kidding. But so he's going to address I think it's both the morning and the evening sessions on that day, the 11 and 6. So if you can make it that day, come and learn about what's happening in Africa. And they call themselves the Obadiah Synod. Obadiah in Hebrew means the one who worships the Lord, or the servant of the Lord. So it's kind of a cool name for a synod. Also a rather humble name, if you're thinking of minor prophets. And Obadiah is who we'll be looking at after Amos. So I also want you to know that last week we had altogether about 13 people or was it 15 who came to the grieving group. So, and a couple more said that they wanted to come, who might come. So I'm glad that we had the group. We'll have just 3 more of those this summer. But God bless you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for letting me do this. Have a good night. You've been listening to Invisible Church, the Bible study podcast from St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota.